All right. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. It's good to be here with you all today. We've got a stack of people who came in with their hands up, and let's get Clody up. Hey, Clody, how are you?
I'm
Are
good.
you?
How are you?
I'm doing well. We are doing well here. Is it colder there than it is here?
It is. It is 40. 40
Mm,
degrees.
man.
It's killing me. I'm gonna
Good.
move to Louisiana.
Come
I
on.
cannot.
Come on. We got plenty of places around here. How
It
are
would
you
be
today?
lovely.
What are your thoughts today?
I came with a question because I'm not very um uh, synthetic as you are. You are a gift of God because you can synthesize all the stories in one,
Hmm.
and I love it about you. So I wanted to ask you: do you know it chronologically the promise of God to Abraham that he would be a mighty nation and uh, in him all the nations will get blessed and so on. Was it before Ishmael's birth or after?
That is a good question. That is a very good question. It, as you know, as a good student of the Bible, like we are you see that it does appear in the text prior to the birth of Ishmael, and so I do think, at least according to the authors, they want us to feel the tension of I've got a promise of a family plan that God is going to use the family of Abraham and Sarah, but they want us to know that that plan is going to require a miracle because you don't have any children. I mean, we're talking about your seed will do this and your seed will do that. And the whole story is that Abraham is saying, but I don't have a child. So I almost think, Clody, that part of the story is part of at least the sacred history so well documented and not contrasted anywhere. Dave made a comment a minute ago, and I'll do this too. I'll say, I have this idea, I wonder about this, but I don't have any textual evidence for it. But in this case, we have nothing really that challenges the fact that there's a promise of a family that's going to change the world, but the problem is that we don't have any children. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. But even if it was before the promise, even if the promise from God to Abraham was before the birth of Ishmael, even if it was after, I think that we draw a very big conclusion out of this story. First, I don't think that a family with two wives is functional, as you put it through all the class today. It cannot be very functional because it has jealousy, it has possessiveness, toxicity, and so on.
Yeah.
And the mother of one child will hate the other child and the other wife. As we saw with the wives of Jacob, who actually were sisters,
Yeah.
and they still hated each other, or at least they were jealous of each other.
Right.
And you cannot love two people the same. You can see that through all this history, this story. And
Right.
also, what I was thinking is that we have to give God more time. Sometimes our lack of faith makes us take some decisions that are immature.
Yeah.
That's what That's what I see from, actually, the Bible I love because I draw lessons out of whatever happened to all the heroes there. And I think that that's what I take with this
Yeah.
story. We should leave God to act on his own time. And we have to have faith and to pray. And I think that what Sarah did with giving to Abraham Hagar,
Yeah.
it wasn't. She was okay. He cannot have kids from me, so let's make him have kids with another woman.
Yeah.
I think that's what I draw out of it.
Well, let me kind of off of what you just said, though. The first thing, as you were describing various thoughts that you were having, those are the thoughts that I have too. When you look at the text, it's not like I can imagine how this situation would cause dysfunction. I mean, like, you could almost imagine, let's say that we give every character in the story the benefit, and we have, like, for instance, we have maybe Sarah wants the plan. She has good intentions, and she says, well, look, I'm pushing 90. I mean, I got to make something happen here. And so she tries to facilitate that through giving Hagar. And then you can understand that that would be a problem, if one of the wives, we see in the biblical text that at times the women who struggle, who want children but can't have children, and that's something that we would understand even in the modern world. I mean, you can feel the tension almost. So the first thing I think about is that I feel that, but I also feel there is a clock ticking for these characters. And you mentioned, and this is a very good point, it's a lesson we should draw from the text, and that is to be patient in our faith. Because
Yeah.
as I tried to point out in the class, it was 11 years, and then it was 14 more years. We almost, I think we read these stories and we think Abraham woke up and he heard every morning from God, hello, Abraham, how's your day going? But it's not. It's a decade. It's sometimes 20 years we see these people have to wait between hearing from God and the next time. So,
Sorry, I also would want to add to this that
okay.
If we see that our desire or prayer or even what we could consider a promise from God didn't happen, it's better to stay with that prayer unanswered than to take the wrong action, than to take the wrong action and to do something that is not considered good by God,
Yeah.
according to the Ten Commandments. At least that's what I see right from wrong. That's how I see right from wrong. So if you see that something could help your situation, but that action is against the laws of God, then don't take it. It's better not to have at all than to have the after effects and the curses of the disobedience.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to say.
No, it's a good point. I think in a lot of times we think, oh, it's been a while now. Maybe I'll just involve myself and I'll force something. And that's not it. Well, I don't want to say never, but in my experience, those pushing, forcing a door open that is not open is generally not going to be the right move.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Shabbat shalom. Thank you for
the stuff.
The
All right. And Karen, how are you, my friend? Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Good.
You
Just
got
a little.
I saw your Facebook post. You have some of those crazy Bible ideas?
Yeah, I guess maybe. I don't know. When I see how do you say Kai Sarah? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, Chaye Sarah.
Kai
Mm-hmm.
Sarah. When I see that, I want to sing that song, K Sarah. Anywho,
Well, sing it.
no.
All right.
Um, on a more serious note, even when I was younger and I would read this story, I always felt like something was off. Um, and if maybe this is some kind of full of symbology parable type story that may or may not have happened.
Yeah.
Um, but if it did happen and the God is really testing Abraham, I think it's a test he failed.
The do you mean the binding of Isaac, that whole thing?
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Okay. All right.
So if he says, you know, when he says, I want you to take your son, your only son, the one that you love, and
Yep.
go to a mountain I'm going to show you.
And
I
kill
think
him.
passing the test would have been no.
Yeah.
The God that I follow would never require that of me.
Yeah. I
But
agree.
instead, he says, "Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he took some bad advice from maybe the culture that he of the place he was in, maybe some kind of so-called prophet. I don't know, because anybody can say anything. If it actually happened. Um, because I mean, now if somebody, if some heavenly being came from the sky to me and said, I want you to take your child, well, even one of them and do the same kind of thing, I would tell him where to go.
Yeah.
I wouldn't listen because the God that I choose to follow would never require that of me.
Just a fair warning, because you said that, and I have said that, the religious police are going to be knocking all over your door. It happens. Look, the first time I said what you said, you would not believe, because people were, how dare you? The story is that that Abraham exhibited great faith by just doing, because you've done this and you've offered your son, yeah, I'm going to do all these wonderful things for you. The first time I read that and saw what you just said, that the right answer should be, I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
It was unbelievable, the pushback that I got on that. But I'm with you. I think that story, a proper answer would have been no. And we have examples of Abraham behaving that way. For instance, he says when he thinks that Sodom and Gomorrah is about to be destroyed, it says, shall the judge of all the earth not do justice? So he knows how to question God. And that was before this. So anyway.
And possibly they had some kind of disagreement. But I don't think this binding and sacrifice thing. I don't know, maybe if I was more scholarly and I could see whose hand this is written in better, I could find that part was added or, written by somebody else or
Yeah.
something. I don't know that, but it just seems, I don't know, really out of character.
Yeah.
For both Abraham and God. So I don't know. I know that there are, books in the New Testament where early stories are not in there are some stories are not in the early editions. And then later you'll find something tacked on to the end, but then the version that we have, it's, in the middle somewhere. I mean, is this something that is added later? I'm not sure, but to me, it just kind of sounds like it.
Yeah.
And it could be some kind of symbolic parable.
It certainly reads like it certainly reads like it wants us to know that, hey, this is the way it's supposedly went down, doesn't it? I mean, the way it's presented.
And I know child sacrifice in that cult, in that area was common. I mean, you can still find those Tophets.
Yeah.
Jono posted an article one time a while back ago, I think, about how Moloch is not a god. Moloch is a type of sacrifice. I don't know if you remember reading that.
I don't remember it. No.
Um, it's and I think that's where we get our word milk, because Moloch in Canaanite means milk.
Huh.
And it's a type of sacrifice, a child who is still, or a lamb who is still drinking the milk.
Yeah.
And that's, so in the Bible, in his article, it was showing that the way the phraseology is used is not correct. So it's not like they're offering it to Moloch, they're offering a Moloch sacrifice. It's not two, it's more like a. So, and the god would probably have been Baal or something. So, and you're going to find that in the archaeological record, you're going to find it mentioned in text. So it was something that the Canaanites practiced. And isn't Abraham in the land of Canaan at this time?
Certainly there's a connection there, and there's a lot to learn. In fact, I jotted down what you said. I have not, at least it's been a while if I ever did this, but as far as Moloch, I would have just in my mind associated it with the idea in Semitic languages where Mem, Lamed, Kaf, or whatever is associated with king. But I'm sure that there's probably something else. If Jono posted it, he may have gotten it maybe from a Torah.com article or whatever. So I'm interested. I'll look at that and see. Interesting.
And there was in the article, it showed like the latest Tophet was actually in Sardinia. And they were still doing it during the Roman occupation. And the Romans, that's one of the things the Romans did, is they outlawed human sacrifice.
Yeah.
They had to go in and physically stop the people from doing this.
Well, when we go to Israel, I know you're on the list. Have you been before? I forgot.
No.
Okay. Well, we'll bring you on one of our night walks. We'll bring you into Gehenna. And that way you can say you went to hell with Ross and Jono.
Yeah.
And Dave Tyler has the honor of bringing me there the first time. We went one night late, and so but we'll go there. And you talk about these sacrifices, particularly towards the end of the First Temple period, and Tophet, and you look at Jeremiah 7, and so. But that'd be an interesting place to go and sit down, and we'll tell these stories, not really ghost stories, but it's a cool place to tell those stories about all the sacrifices. Now it's a beautiful place. I see Elon is with us. He's in Israel, and it's a quite, I tell people all the time, if you go to Gehenna now, I mean, people are having picnics and playing soccer. It's actually a wonderful place. Makes a little people nervous though. So
Anywho.
Yeah.
That's always how I've viewed that story. Even, when I was younger, being raised in religion, I still just didn't, some things just don't sit right.
Yeah, there's certainly some oddities in the tale, I guess. So good stuff. Hey, stick around. Was that it? You got more good stuff to give us? All right. Well, hang around. You might come up with some other good stuff for us.
Thanks.
Thank you. Julia. Hello, my friend. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly well. How are you?
All right. I had one thing to say, but I also came up with something else because of what Karen said.
Okay.
Looking at the flip side, I'm thinking if it did go down the way it did, God did tell Abraham. Abraham didn't argue with him.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the last minute, he goes, don't do this.
Yeah.
It seems to then point to two things. One of the commandments to say, thou shalt not murder. It's like, I got to put this in.
Mm-hmm.
And it also points to, and I can't remember where it says it, if someone tells you to do these things that are against me, they're lying.
Yeah.
And what it brings to mind is Abraham was listening. He's like, well, he was listening to everything I said. This isn't good. But now that it's put into effect, don't do this. This scenario can't happen again. And then what comes up is what Karen said. If it happened then later, it's like, no, this is not right. This can't be what is supposed to happen because we have the commandments. So I know that my correct answer is supposed to be no. You know,
Yeah.
Abraham was so, and you think about it, you want to think about why he did it. If it's in fact true and not that it's been put in,
Mm-hmm.
then it's like, oh,
Yeah.
wow. You know, he didn't say anything like, he didn't then question, I understand. You said it's supposed to go through Isaac. I'm supposed to become a great nation. And now you're telling me, and he didn't. He just was like, oh, God says that he has to have a plan. And then he puts in, all right, yeah, no. He was willing to follow me to the ends of, and this is not what I want.
Right.
Then that's the one thing that I thought of when Karen was talking. And the other thing that I thought of when you had your class is when you brought up, because I never paid attention, that Abraham came down by himself.
Uh-huh.
It never occurred to me. And what I put in my notes then was, huh, did Isaac not want to walk back with his dad after that happened? Is Isaac thinking about what happened? Is he talking to God? Is he sad? Is he
Yeah.
crying? Is
Uh-huh.
he angry? You know, he's just got some stuff to deal with. And then, or is it that he said, hey, going back to your mom, this is one of the times I'm taking my trip to Beersheba.
Yeah.
It could be that, but all of it is a good thing because if Isaac goes and tells mom what happened,
Oh,
that's not a
Lord.
conversation he wants to have right away anyway. And my thing was maybe he wasn't separated from Sarah. Maybe he's splitting his time in between
Mm-hmm.
Hagar and Sarah. And when Isaac tells what happened, this kills her. He don't even get a chance to go back and give an explanation. He's like,
Yeah.
oh, you know, he was just splitting his time and he was going, ooh, this is not a conversation. Let me put this off for a little bit. I'm going to go over here and then I'm
Yeah.
going to come back. Maybe Sarah will have calmed down and we can talk about it. So those those are the two things that I had. I
Well,
mean,
look.
because
Yeah. Go ahead.
suppose that Sarah then would have had the conversation with him that I had brought up because of Karen. But if he says it's going through Isaac, why would you do this? Well, God
Mm-hmm.
told me, he's like, you were supposed to say no. So
Mm-hmm.
it could have been that.
Well, you know, I think about it, like you said when you started, it's a good point. So if I always think about, like, I know that some people will come back on what I say with what is the standard view. Okay. So the standard view is forget all the academic stuff. We don't care what academics think. Forget all of the different sources. We're just reading the story along. And one takeaway could be, and it could be that God is taking someone from a culture that finds that this is something that's done. So in other words, humans,
Yes.
you know, there are sacrifices. And sometimes
Yes.
you take your favorite child and toss them to the volcano god or
Yes.
whatever. And so maybe God said, look, I'm going to try something. I've got to convince these people that they don't do that. So I'm
Yes.
going to say, I need you to kill your kid. And the person goes, oh, man, I should have known this was coming. I finally get a child, and now, you know, he's a
Yeah.
grown man and that.
Yeah.
So that's the view. And then all of a sudden God says, no, 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 stop. Well, the angel
Right.
says that. And it could be, this is the way I used to teach it. I was very fundamentalist. And so what I used to teach was this was a way that God could show a shift, that we don't do this anymore,
Mm-hmm.
that we, meaning God saying, I
Mm-hmm.
always found it repudiating to sacrifice humans.
Mm-hmm.
I always felt it was horrible and it never came into my mind. And so that's the way he shifts the focus, and then Abraham's got it straight. All of those things notwithstanding, when I think of, I mean, Seth is, working with me. We work together all the time, so I just use him. If, let's say, God told me, I need you to take him up and do this, whatever, and I'm the Abraham in the story, I could imagine that if I went through with this, that our relationship would be strained. And I cannot help but to think that we are amiss if we don't say the same thing about the biblical characters.
Yeah.
I mean,
because think about it. I mean, if we close in and put what's in 18 where it says, knowing that Abraham's going to become a great nation, let me tell him about Sodom. Suppose you skip it over to that. Knowing he's going to become a great nation, let me do this. And then because what you're trying to tell him is, then you have the conversation that should have happened there, which is, I want you to sacrifice your son. And then he says, then the conversation should happen.
Yeah.
But you said I'm going to be a great nation, and I just don't think this is right. That's a conversation that should have been had, just like the one with Sodom, which is, how about the righteous? Maybe that is that as well. But I didn't think about it. You're right. It would be uncomfortable to walk down, because suppose the conversation is, but you almost killed me. And he's like, yeah, but God is like, yeah, then I don't know if I can be with you, because if God says this again, I don't feel safe with you.
Yeah, and the standard view is, well, Isaac is a man of faith too. He trusted that God wouldn't allow this to go through, and he submitted himself to his father. And look, that is the fundamentalist, Bible-thumping view. Now you could say, well, that's the one I believe. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But what I'm trying to do is just to look at these texts. For me, I don't remove the God part of the text, but I want to think about it from a human standpoint, because I'm human.
Yeah.
Like, I cannot imagine, let's say this goes on, and Seth decides he's going to go back. I can see him walking in and say, Mama, you're not going to believe what the old man did.
Yes.
And I can tell you now that I then could say, well, that's why Daddy didn't go home. I'd be in another town. So that's why he went to Beersheba. This is one natural. He's like, I am not going to go back. Sarah will kill me.
Right.
I mean, just common sense.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Hey, good deal. Appreciate your thoughts. And Todd and Angel. All right, what you got for us?
Well, I got a small little shift in gears.
Okay.
Kind of the same premise here, though. But I caught a few things you were saying during the class that kind of made me think. So when it comes to Ishmael and Isaac, it's interesting that he promises to multiply Ishmael, but he makes his covenant with Isaac.
Yeah,
that's interesting. And if supposed the theory is, I think I've said this before, the supposed theory is Ishmael is the father of the Arabs, of the Arab nation. And it's interesting that he has, and they're always in combat with Israel, who has the covenant. So that's just interesting. Of course, that's a long debated story too.
Yeah.
In theory. And another thing that you said too, that I never realized this about, you don't hear about Isaac again until later.
Yeah.
And it kind of made me wonder, is it possible that he held anger towards what Hagar did, as far as allowing Ishmael to pick on him, or whatever, the discussion we had a couple of weeks ago. And I thought it was interesting, and I'm sure you are familiar with these, the Book of Jubilees, but especially the Targum.
Yeah.
It's interesting that in chapter 17 in Jubilees, it says, let's see here, I lost my place. Okay, and Sarah saw Ishmael playing and dancing, and Abraham rejoicing with great joy. And she became jealous of Ishmael and said to Abram, cast out this bondwoman, her son. And then he says it grieved Abraham's sight because of his maidservant. And kind of like what you were kind of hinting at earlier about, he probably loved Hagar.
Yeah.
And which also brought to mind, too, now the translation that the Targum has, Sarah observed the son of Hagar, the Mizraim, whom she bare to Abraham, deriding, which is much stronger word than just, what was it that they...
picking on or mocking.
Deriding
I
is
think
basically
it said
insulting and defacing and all that kind of stuff, lack of respect. And, I know we talked about that, but, if that builds up over time, eventually you're going to pop.
Yeah.
But I also said, too, at that time that she dug her own hole. So...
Yeah. Well, it's clearly there's a lot of action going on in these texts, and if we just consider the human element in the stories and we think of these people as real people, it really is easy to go, oh, I can see why that. Okay. Well, I wonder if it was, brothers pick on each other, so maybe it was more than picking. What is it? So it's easy for us to sit in that chair. I mean, honestly, and try to find what's really going on. That's what we ought to be doing, is looking at what's happening in these texts. So,
yeah, because it really helps to go back into different books and kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together. Some of them's right, some of them ain't. I mean, you just have to decide it for yourself.
Yeah.
But it does make you think a little bit. It kind of puts more of a, if I want to sound intelligent here, an anthropomorphic thinking of it.
Yeah. Well, and also I think it's important anytime we read these texts, as clearly as we can, to put ourselves in the story. Like I know it sounds weird, but I think most of you good Bible people know when I read the story, I mean, I can do this with other books too, but especially the biblical stories, knowing where these places are, like I can think of Beersheba, I can think of these different sites, and I put myself in my mind in that place, and then I build the story around me. I saw a little while ago, either Libby or Lando, I forgot it scrolled past a while back, but they said, look, Book
of Jubilees.
Something about the map where we can see where these places are. I do have a map. I mean, most of you have a Bible map, but if you need a Bible map, I have one on our website on that HorebInstitute.com. But the point is, when you read these stories, you want to look at what does it tell us geographically, and that's why I think it's important. For instance, yesterday I did post, hey, you might need my map if you don't have a map, but look at a map, because if Abraham is in Beersheba and she's in Hebron, you can quickly look and see that's 30 miles apart. It's not like they're just like living in tents next door, and Abraham comes home from the factory one day and he goes to Hagar, and the next day he goes to, no, it's a concerted trip. It takes a while. I say 30 miles. That's a pretty good trip, in the ancient world. It's going to take him better part of a day to move and go see and whatever.
Yeah, of course, by today's standards, though, he would be living with his mistress and then going back to mourn his wife.
Well, I think that's what happened. I think he is living with Hagar if she's the mistress. No, I mean, she's in Beersheba. He's in Beersheba. Sarah dies in Hebron, and he's like, oh, I better go. And he's not with her. That's the point.
It could be another reason why Isaac is not mentioned again until later, because he didn't approve of what Abraham was doing. I don't know.
Could be. No, could be.
It's theoretical.
Yeah, I think it certainly had something to do with Daddy throwing him on that altar. That's just my view.
If that happened, I mean, that's But if you think about it by today's standards, though, he would be holding a grudge against his father for going living with his mistress.
Maybe.
Who he might have seen in his own mind she approved of Ishmael, picking on him.
Yeah.
So why would he have any love or respect for her?
Yeah, sometimes the step relationships and stepmom and I guess all those kind of things are. We see this kind of stuff in the modern world. There's some things that we can look at and go, I can see how that's a problem. So,
like I said earlier, what a tangled web.
That's right. That's right. And we weave a lot of times. That's right.
These are days of our lives.
Good deal.
That's all I got, buddy.
All right, man. All right, James Brumgard. How are you, James?
Hi, everybody.
Hey, James.
Hi. Hey, this discussion on a sacrifice of the firstborn brought to mind that there's, the Levitical writings talk about that which opens the womb is holy unto God and all that, set apart. What is it that the firstborn has a special place in all of our cultures? The firstborn in England got all the inheritance.
Yeah.
That was English law. I don't know how that is in other countries, but there's this thing about the firstborn, and I'm just bringing it up that, was the all other cultures, did they, think that sacrificing the firstborn would be a way of showing some deity your thanks for allowing me to reproduce and have a family and all that? But I don't I don't get it, but but I understand that certainly that's what the record tells us. So I don't know if the Levitical writings is a way to again emphasize a special place in the birth order, that there's some that person gets set apart. I don't know.
Well, even apart from the sacrificial system, we get later legislation, and I'm not even entertaining scholarly documentary hypothesis, none of that. I mean, just if we just take the Bible as we have it, this story and other patriarchal narratives will give us reason for some of the laws we meet with later. Like, for instance, if you have two women and they have a son, you can't hate the one. And, it's like, well, okay, all right, I see where that could come from. There are laws later in biblical law that say, a man should not marry sisters. Well, anyone who's read the patriarchal narratives could see where that might come from, right? So I think you're onto something, James, when you suggest that quite possibly there are later laws which do stem from maybe what we learn in some of these other narratives. I mean, who knows? I mean, when you get to, say, Ezekiel 20, verse 25, where it says that God gave statutes which were not good, and it talks about what you just mentioned, the firstborn and opening the womb. Well, it's not talking about human sacrifice there. What does that mean, Anyway, just some different thoughts kind of stemming off what you said. I think it's important that we do look at these ideas and say, hey, where did that come from?
Yep. That's all I had.
All right. Let me just pull that up, though, in, let's see, 2025. Moreover, Ezekiel 20:25, moreover, I gave them statutes that were not good and ordinances by which they could not live. This is God talking about giving statutes that weren't good. I defiled them through their very gifts in their offering up all their firstborn, in order that I might horrify them so that they might know that I am the Lord. Well, he's clearly, did God ever command human sacrifice? No, he didn't. So this text is talking about other sacrifices. Why in the world? Anyway, just some thoughts. Ezekiel 20:25, Valerie. Okay. Now, I see one. I'm going to get James in just a minute. I see a note from Elon. I lean towards two distinct narratives, a Hebron narrative and a Negev narrative, which were later combined into one story. And that is absolutely one of the better possibilities here, because what we see is you've got the mixing of these ancient sources to produce what some have called the sum is better than its parts, but it leaves trails. So like you go, well, wait a minute. Is he in Hebron or is he in Beersheba? Is he living in the Negev? Is he living in, and we get the same thing that we covered in a lot of detail in the story of the beginning of the Abraham narrative. Is his birthplace, which by the way shows up in chapter 24. He tells his servant, go to the place of my birth and so forth. Where is that? Is he sending him to Haran or Ur of the Chaldees? We talked about all that in a previous class. Anyway, all right, let's move on down. James, we got a stack of Jameses. Hey, James, is this James Erickson?
Yes, correct.
All right,
Good
James.
afternoon. Afternoon, sir.
Afternoon to you.
So I have a question for you, and I'll let you elaborate. In your thoughts, in your mind, do you think Ishmael was a Hebrew?
No, not in the sense. Well, it depends on what Hebrew is. We have two understandings. One is that Hebrew, and these are both debated in sources. One is that Hebrew, remember we meet this first in Genesis 14. Abram is the first called an Ivri, a Hebrew. And there, most people stem off and they say, well, it either means a descendant of Eber through Shem's line, or it means one who crosses over, because the general idea of the root word in Hebrew is to cross over, to pass over. And so some say, and this is where I would probably lean, is that Abram was considered an outsider. He's comes from another place. You're like, oh, that's the guy from the other side of the river. That's who Abram is. And in that sense, someone might say, well, his descendants could be, and Ishmael is a descendant. But the text is very clear to stress that Hagar is an Egyptian, and her child with Abraham is never referred to as a Hebrew. Does that help answer?
Partially.
Okay.
Ishmael is a Hebrew name. Is that correct?
It's not really. It's I'm sorry. It is Hebrew in the sense that we look at biblical Hebrew because it's tied to the word Shema, which means to hear, and then El, which is a form of the divine name. But we could really say it's a Semitic name, and not necessarily. I think it's semantics. I think you could say, well, yeah, he's Hebrew in that sense. But it's, what I guess the question really would come down to, are the Hebrews, is that an ethnic term, or is it something that means more accurately someone who crosses over? Now, in the modern sense, we talk about Hebrew, the Hebrew language. But modern descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob generally refer to themselves primarily under, an Israeli, modern Israelis, and they speak Ivrit. They speak Hebrew. But in the ancient world, I think it really meant, it was referring to those who had come from the other side, from another place. They weren't native Canaanites, is what I'm trying to get at. But Ishmael, one more to say yes to you, one more time. The name Ishmael is Hebrew. It's a Hebrew name.
All
Fair
right. Yeah.
Clear as mud?
I'm getting clear on that. I thought my theology was ruined, but now it's a little bit more stable now. Thank you.
Well, tell me a little bit more about that, because I might not have answered it appropriate. So run by me what you're thinking, and why would it matter in your thinking, because you might have a point that I need to get.
Well, considering Abraham is a descendant of Eber, and
Okay.
so in that sense, he would be a Hebrew from the Shem. Now, in your thinking now, you got me really going now. You're thinking, do you think that since Abraham was a descendant of Shem, do you think Ishmael would be in that line?
Clearly, we have a mixing of the lines, and that happens. And then from Abraham out, we have, like here's a thought. You talk about Semitic people. That name also derives from this idea of Shem, right? So Semitic people is not just talking about Israelis, or anciently, the biblical world, Israelites. Now, I've done this before. I love Israel. I travel to Israel often. I have many native Israelis that are good friends, and I am a Zionist in many ways. Now, that doesn't mean I agree with everything that the Israeli government does, nor does it mean that I agree with anything any human government does. But I am convinced personally that the miracle of Israel today, which is very democratic and good and kind to all its inhabitants, that is part of the divine plan. That's my view. Okay. And having said that, in the past, I've posted a meme, if you will, that shows sort of the biblical definition. A lot of times you'll see this as the greater Israel. You know what I'm talking about, James, where it's from Egypt all the way into deep into the Middle East. Well, technically, the promises that God gave to Abraham, yes, it does. Most of the promise is focused on Isaac, but some of these promises have to do with other descendants of Abram and Abraham as well. That's why we read, he also will become great and a mighty nation and so forth. So I think that Semitic is a term that goes beyond modern day Israelis or Jews, if you're strictly speaking of descendants of Abraham. Now, one more point on the understanding of Hebrew, I do get now, your view is a very well supported view. If you look at Hebrews as descendants of Eber, a lot of people do say that. The other view, could it be the same in both? I don't know. But the other view is primarily that Abram is called a Hebrew in Genesis 14:13 because he came from the other side of the river, the Euphrates. But when you look at it, a lot of people confuse the terms Hebrew, Israelite, and Jew. Abraham is a Hebrew, but he's not an Israelite, and he's not a Jew. He has a son named Isaac. You could say that Isaac is also a Hebrew, but Isaac is not an Israelite. Isaac is not a Jew. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob becomes Israel, and his descendants become Israelites. You could say all of Jacob's descendants are Hebrews. They're called such in the Bible, all of them. They're also Israelites because they descend from Israel, but not all of them are Jews. Only those who were associated with the kingdom of Judah. So it's these terms, and you're doing right by trying to get back at, well, what does that really mean? Is Ishmael a Hebrew? I think those are good, considerable points. Does that help?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for your elaboration on that. I agree with you about the descendants of Jacob being Israel, and they have the right to the land of Canaan there, as Abraham saw it. That's my viewpoint, and I consider that all the ancient writings were for the Hebrews origins to learn their origins of their descent. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Well, thank you for elaborating and sharing your deepest thoughts on that.
Well, you keep plugging away at it, and if you come up with something that helps me to understand it better, feel free to reach out. I'm always looking to learn too. So,
well, thank you very much, sir.
All right. Now, look, we've got. I'm going to go ahead and go 9 more minutes with the full group, and then we'll spend a little bit more personal time with the Yachad. So, let's see. Let me go, Damon. How are you, Damon? Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. Or afternoon,
Shabbat
I
Shalom.
guess it is.
Well, afternoon for you, still morning for me.
Oh, okay, all right.
So,
What can I help you with today? What are your thoughts?
A couple of comments. One I already raised in the chat, and then another one, actually, James reminded me that I had mentioned something in the YouTube chat earlier during the class that I think ties in. So let me go back to the YouTube comment first. With what you're responding that we don't get to actual Israelites until we get to the sons of Jacob. I think that's significant. And I think what's also significant is that the promise that was given to Abraham in Genesis 17:5, where it said he'd be the father of many nations.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that, some of those blessings went to Isaac, some of them went to Ishmael, etc., and the other children.
Yep.
But I think the emphasis again on many nations doesn't necessarily carry through to all of the line. We find it emphasized again in a very interesting place, Genesis 48:19.
Yeah. Yeah, Melo Hagoim.
Yes.
Yeah.
When we have the blessing of Jacob on Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, Ephraim is the one that said is going to become many nations.
Yeah.
And I don't know any Christians today that even know about that promise or think, well, wait a second, we only know about Israel. Where are these other nations? What other nations are we talking about?
Let me jump in. I think that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of Christians who know about that, because one of the most popular movements that I see now among Christians are those who believe that they are, in fact, the lost sheep of the house of Israel through Ephraim, mainly through the works of people like Batya Wooten many years ago, and obviously some of the So I would just contend that there are plenty who say, wait a minute, I'm in the fix here. I'm one of those nations. So, and I think you probably know that too, in terms of that group of people. Anyway, I just wanted to jump into that.
Sure.
Yep.
So the other comment that I had was when Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac, and of course Isaac's curious, where's the sacrifice?
Yeah.
Okay. But then Abraham binds Isaac and lays him on the altar. I think Isaac at that point knew what was going on. He, according to the text, didn't seem like he was resisting what his father had in mind.
Right.
So my thought there is that Abraham had accomplished a great deal in his lifetime, and he was a very powerful personality. Isaac, not so much. It's like he was very submissive and maybe a little passive aggressive. So I wanted to pull that out because later on in the story, and later on in G5, God gives a prophecy to Rebekah about the 2 children who were in her womb.
Yeah.
I don't think Rebekah didn't tell Isaac, but it's very interesting that Isaac doesn't appear to pay any attention to that whatsoever. I think that maybe he's a little turned off to God at that point. So I just wanted to bring that out.
But just to kind of jump in on that, let me ask you this. You're not suggesting, I don't see anywhere in the text that Rebekah shares that with Isaac, but your view is that she may have told Isaac, and Isaac was just not religious anymore. Is that correct?
I don't
Am
know
I
that
understanding that right?
I don't know that he's not religious, but I think at that point he's a little bit more suspect of, okay, God has said things in the past that were really sketchy, so I'm
Yeah.
I'm not sure I buy this.
I got you. So yeah, I may have not worded that right. I think you said it differently, but you're suggesting that Isaac, hearing about another one of God's plans, he has a flashback to being strapped to an altar.
Yeah, and maybe not so excited about that plan.
Gotcha. I understand. Yeah, have you read, by the way, I just saw Doug Martin's note. Jason Staples has a fascinating theory about Ephraim nations being the Gentilized descendants of the Assyrian exiles. Jason Staples has written at least one book that I know about. I think he's actually written more than one by now, but it's on kind of an academic view of the lost tribes, if you will. And I don't want to say I have every book that's come out on this subject in the last however many decades, but I do have an extensive library on the so-called lost tribes of Israel. And Jason Staples does approach it from a very interesting way. And you mentioned in Genesis 48 and into 49, there are a couple of very, I think, interesting passages. And I first really got into this through the work of people like Bacha Wooten. Bacha Wooten wrote a book, Who is Israel? It's a Christian view, but one of the things, and I want to give credit, I think that's where I learned from her that there is a passage in Paul's writings in Romans chapter 11, verse 25, as I recall, where it actually mentions the fullness of the Gentiles, I think is King James. In other words, he's trying to define who Israel is. And so what I learned from her, now this is decades ago, was that phrase, if you look at the Hebrew, it's Melo Hagoyim, which is precisely what is in the prophecies toward the end of Genesis, where Jacob is prophesying about the descendants. So what happens in a lot of Christian groups, or they might not call themselves Christian, but they are Christian, but they might call themselves Hebrew roots people or whatever, they would say, I found me in the text, and that's one of the things that they would use is to associate Romans 9 through 11 with their personal place in the walk with God. So that's why I responded the way I did when you said that. I just happen to know that there are a lot of people who now, they would call themselves Ephraim in their definition of themselves, I think. So.
Yes.
Good stuff.
So that brings up one more thing, and I'll try to keep it short.
Okay.
I had mentioned before about a book that I had come across by Caleb Howells, The Trojan Kings of Britain.
Okay.
And what he's doing, and I'm not going to go into it too much, is he's trying to locate the Trojan War in history, but he's also commenting on a lot of things that are going on at that point, which I think tie into the migrations of the Lost 10 Tribes. Now, he doesn't see it that way, but the information in the book is really, really interesting. In addition to that, one of the things I mentioned to Caleb, because I actually am able to talk to him through Discord, was that I have seen a lot of Lost 10 Tribes material that just focuses on where the Lost 10 Tribes went and doesn't really consider the wider historical context. So I'm still looking out there for things that cover like that wider historical context from like the 9th and 8th centuries BC down to the 6th century BC to show, okay, how did this migration start?
Yeah.
And where did they start going? So if you know anything like that, I would really be interested.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. One of the problems is that we just don't have a lot of good, reliable. A lot of it's too mystical and mythical and so forth. But yeah, I'll definitely look at my library and see if there's anything. You may have everything that I have, but I'll certainly look at it. And if there are things that might fit what you're looking for, I'll definitely forward those on. So,
Yep.
good
One
deal.
more very tiny comment. One thing that I mentioned to Caleb even, in Genesis 49, it talks about a prophecy relating to Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
In the Hebrew, Dan, D-N, shall judge D-N, his people. Dan shall Dan his people.
Yeah.
Okay. What Dan has historically done, and we even see it in the biblical account, is he'll conquer a certain area and he'll name it after himself, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that as Dan migrated, we're going to see a lot of the name Dan where he migrated to.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the prevalent themes in the search for the tribes. One thing I've come across quite often. Also, there's an association with the serpents, tied to Dan. And so a lot of tribes writers talk about that when this tribe of Dan moved like a serpent in the ancient world, it left these different names of places with that DN associations. So yeah, I've seen that in almost everything that I've read on the tribes. And who knows? I think I'm not one to strictly go by, some of these, this tribe became predominantly this nation. I think that is long on speculation, short on evidence. And I know that a lot of religious people are really bought into that. So, but I do know what you're talking about on this connection with Dan. So good stuff.
Okay.
Good stuff. Yeah, I'll look too, and who knows? Maybe I've got something here that might be helpful. I'll check it out.
Sure. Thank you.
I appreciate you, Damon. Okay, we're going to say goodbye to our YouTube audience, and we appreciate you joining us, and thanks for coming. If you are a member of the Yachad, come on over to the Zoom call. And if not, we will see you next week. Hopefully you'll join us Thursday night for the time with Jono on Torah Pearls. And if not, we'll see you next Saturday. Have a beautiful Sabbath. The rest of you hang with me here in the Zoom and we'll continue.